Hello and welcome to Grung's Week in Review. We got you covered for the week that was for May 24, 2026. Hovik, how are you?
I don't think any Armenian could be not concerned right now. So we are living in very concerning times, and there's a lot of tension in terms of the electoral atmosphere and the campaigning. But
Hey,
it is
Hovik,
what it is.
we were initially supposed to make this recording earlier this morning. That's May 25, but we waited for whatever reason. We ended up doing this at midnight. So essentially, we're doing this on May 26. In the meantime, some news has come about that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the
Yeah.
United States, is going to visit Armenia tomorrow. Actually, well, today, Tuesday. Do you know anything more about this?
No, I mean, it was a pretty sudden announcement, and not even through leaks. When Vance visited, there were leaks about it. So he's visiting us from India, and the official schedule says there will be some kind of a signing ceremony after he meets Mirzoyan. But the reason for this what seemingly urgent trip is making everyone guess. And it's worthwhile to mention that it's taking place 2 weeks after the US-China summit. That was followed also by the Russia-China Putin's visit. So I was just listening to an Armenian analyst, Hakop Badalyan, we'll include the link at the show notes, that says he had an interesting take, and he says that there's a constellation of reasons that could include the urgency. First, of course, is the war in Iran. Second is those meetings between China and the US. We know that TRIPP is seen as a critical part of the middle corridor that links China to Europe. So Badalian was speculating that essentially by taking TRIPP, US is taking control of that critical connection. And that was the focus of his report, although it remains to be seen. But it's important to highlight how TRIPP came about, right? In late 2025, just 2 days before Witkoff visited Putin to have that negotiations about the Alaska summit, they announced the trip. So 2 days before Witkoff's visit. And then after that, Russia was relatively quiet on TRIPP. So
Until
he
early
thinks,
this year, I think.
so he thinks that he's asking whether some kind of internal verbal maybe agreements or secret agreements between US and Russia have been violated when Russia earlier this year started to violently talk about TRIPP being a bad idea and mentioning the Treaty of Turkmenchai and saying that it disrupts internal balance and there will be no peace. I think that was the exact words. There will be no peace in the region if that balance is disturbed.
Well, this
So
is an entire dimension that I hadn't really thought about just in one day. I was essentially thinking that Marco Rubio is coming here because Pashinyan is not winning enough in the elections. So basically, to give him another boost. I mean, in February, we had J.D. Vance here, and he flat out endorsed Pashinyan for the re-election as prime minister. And then, we had the EPC summit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But maybe it hasn't been enough. So he's not winning.
I mean, that's possible. Undoubtedly, Pashinyan will try to gain electoral points out of this. But I'm just thinking, okay, you are the US, you have a war with Iran that's still ongoing. You have all these crises around the world, and you're here to prop up Pashinyan. I don't know. It doesn't pass a smell test for me, but it remains to be seen, I guess.
Armenia has become the crossroads of politics.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk some more about it next week when we know a little bit more, and we'll also dig up the right people to start talking about this and analyze the issue. In the meantime, Hovig, it's election time. Polls are aplenty, and in the past week, we've seen a number of poll results from the IRI, for example, the MPG. We have another poll that we'd never heard of, and I don't exactly know how reliable it is, but I found it through Arminfo via the California Courier. We'll talk about those things. Why don't you start us off with the MPG poll?
Yeah. The MPG poll was conducted between May 19 and 21. I really like their short period of field work because it takes a better snapshot of sentiment at a specific point in time. We will have more details on our show notes. I'm just going to cover a few questions, and then we will spend some time in talking about poll reliability, because the bigger question, I think the elephant in the room, is that there are these different polls that are painting a completely different picture. If you believe the polls from IRI and EVN report, then Nikol has 90% in the parliament, along with some satellite forces. If you believe MPG, then it's a slightly different picture, and I tried to come up with a numerical method for establishing the reliability of these polls. But before that, let's go to a few questions that were asked in this poll. The first question that I would like to talk about is the following. Will the 2026 parliamentary elections in Armenia be fair, or will they be rigged? Or more than 51% said that the elections would be free and fair, and more than 36% said that the elections would be conducted with falsifications.
Well, so exactly, we talked a little bit about this from the previous MPG poll. I think the most important thing, though, is what they will do. What percentage of the people are prepared to do something about it if they find out that, it's been falsified?
If the parliamentary elections are unfair, are you ready to take to the streets to fight for justice, or fight for to defend your right, your vote? 51% of all the respondents to that question said they will do so.
Hovik, is the number up or down from the previous poll? Do you know?
It is also grown. So in the previous poll, it was 36.6 plus 9.9. So about 47% were saying they will hit the streets. Now it's more than 51%.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Then the poll had a lot of questions about the campaign of which parties did you notice, hear about. There was also a question about which party's brochure or program did you read. And I actually spent a lot of time trying to analyze that. A lot of the voters, or a lot of the respondents, indicated that yes, they are exposed to campaign material from all parties. More than 50% said that they were exposed to civil contract material or campaign. And why that is important is that's essentially an indicator that this poll is hitting potential civil contract voters. So it's not like this poll is only focused on the opposition voters. There are true civil contract voters in this poll, and there's a significant weight of civil contract voters. And of course, the most important questions that were asked related to the elections. One said, will you participate in the elections? And the other said, which party would you vote for? So more than 73% said they would participate in the elections. And we have I can read the breakdown of the major parties.
Yeah, well, if you can give us like the top 5, for example,
yeah,
that's
the top 5
interesting.
So according to this poll, the top 5 are civil contract with 28.8%, Strong Armenia with 14.9%, Armenia Alliance with 12.1%, Prosperous Armenia with 8.7%, and Wings of Unity with 5.8%. Now, there's a statistical trick that you can do if you take out the undecided voters and scale these numbers to represent only the decided voters, assuming that the undecided voters will vote in the same proportion, then you actually end up with a mandate distribution that would allow the opposition to form a coalition government, according to MPG. And altogether, they would get 57.4% of the mandates. So civil contracts, 28.8%. When you take out the undecideds, becomes 40% or 40.6%, and the remaining goes to the opposition. And if you have concerns about MPG and their reliability, just hold on, because we'll be talking about that.
Before you move forward, Remind me exactly how are you deciding that there are a healthy number of respondents who are on the pro-Pashinyan or the civil contract side?
So the poll asks a lot of interesting questions. It says the major one is the percentage given to Nikol Pashinyan. 28.8% is within the range, plus or minus, of the other polls. So IRI, the vote for Pashinyan or for civil contract remains the same across all these polls. Like it's between 28 and 30 something. So that doesn't change that much. The only thing that changes in these polls is the opposition numbers. The other questions, for instance, they ask which political party or alliance campaign have you seen, noticed, or encountered? And among those polled, more than 54% said they had seen civil contract campaign. 35% they had seen the strong, or they had been exposed to the Strong Armenia campaign. And all of the other opposition, including Prosperous Armenia, there's a good signal that the respondents have been exposed to their campaigns with the right proportions. So it's not like, it's lopsided. It's, from civil contract downward. They even ask questions about which party or alliance's election program have you read. So that actually, instead of just measuring exposure, it measures engagement. Exposure is passive. You passively can observe the campaign, a rally, but you have
Okay.
to do something active to read the material. So that's why I think this poll, it has a good sample of civil contract respondents. Now that is the result. Now whether it will remain so with the upcoming so-called military parade that is called an accountability parade,
The
and
inventory accountability or
Rubio's
whatever.
visit. I wonder if Pashinyan has other surprises, like some other statesmen visiting him to give him credits, Western statesmen. But yeah, maybe he will try to get a few more points. But it's apparent through all these polls that no matter how hard Pashinyan tries, he can't get more than like 30-40% in the general polls.
So, Hovik, what does this translate to percentages or rather mandates in the parliament?
Okay, so again, in more detail, the mandates are if these numbers, if the voters vote the same way that the substantive responses in this report indicate, then it would be 40.6% for civil contract, 20.8% for Strong Armenia, 16.8% for Armenia Alliance, 11.9% for Prosperous Armenia, and Wings of Unity would be at 7.9%. And there are actually a few contenders, runners-up, that are very close to hitting the threshold, but they just missed it by a few tenths of a percentage points. So it's possible, if this poll is accurate, then DOK and Bright Armenia might also have a chance in the parliament, because especially DOK, they're at 3.9% if you scale them. So it remains to be seen. But that's going to be the makeup. And essentially, to repeat, it will translate into the collective opposition if they decide to unite. I'm not sure if I can put my money on that. If they decide to unite, they would get 57% of the mandates.
So that means they could actually take up the responsibility of forming a government if that were to happen.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Although it
Okay.
will be a very rancorous, undecisive coalition, because many of the things that people are vying for, such as getting Samvel Karapetyan as prime minister and so forth, are not going to be possible unless you have constitutional majority. And it's not even clear that all the opposition parties would vote to change the law to allow Samvel Karapetyan to win. So if that doesn't happen, then as the single most highest vote gainer, let's say, in the elections, what would Strong Armenia do?
Well,
And
on the other
that
hand, though,
remains.
don't forget that if somehow Strong Armenia cannot become the prime minister's party, then Armenia Alliance comes in fairly close to second. But a number of parties have put a red line that they will not join an alliance where Robert Kocharyan is going to become
Yeah,
prime minister. So this is this is quite a dilemma, I think, for the opposition.
Yeah, in all honesty, I mean, and we will have a parliament with 40% of the votes controlled by civil contract, which is I've expressed this previously as well. I think that this will be a temporary parliament, and the best thing that could happen is if it's dissolved as soon as possible and new elections are organized afterwards, assuming that civil contract, of course, loses. Um, uh, without civil contract holding on to the administrative resources, because most of these 30% or 40% that civil contract has are purely due to admin resources.
You know what you just said is almost exactly the platform of Bolorin Temem, against all. That as soon as the government is formed, they should make a few changes and then dissolve themselves for new parliamentary elections,
Yeah,
which
except
is
they
which
also
is
want to
what their
change.
platform is.
They also want to change remove the stable majority clause in the parliament. So I think that one way or another, I think that that sentiment um, exists, and I don't think it will be possible to um, govern Armenia without a strong mandate by a single party, no matter what. Especially when in these trying times with Aliyev and so forth, negotiating with Aliyev, the whoever leads Armenia needs to have a strong mandate.
Hovik, let's talk about this hidden vote index that we've been discussing offline. It's a good time to do this for this poll because the contrast is kind of extreme with the IRI poll that I want to talk about later.
Yeah. So that was the question I was asking myself is, a lot of people are saying, well, how do you trust MPG versus IRI? And I tried to come up with a mathematical way to do this. I mean, it's not my own invention. I did some research on it. I have tried to capture three metrics that indicate the quality of the poll or the potential for the poll to be skewed. Hidden vote index that measures the amount of people who did not disclose who they would vote for. They either said, I don't know, or I refuse to respond, or I have a difficulty in responding. So in this poll for MPG, that's 12%. That's very small compared to the same number for IRI and EVN report. Then I measured something called the participation certainty index. That's the amount of people, according to the poll, who said yes, they will participate in the vote. And in the MPG, that's 73.3%. Okay. So that's also a good signal because it shows market differences from EVN report and IRI, who are predicting like 90% turnout.
Yeah, basically 92% in the IRI.
And the last metric that we're going to capture for every single poll now that we talk about, that the data is available for, we'll capture the participation sensitivity gap. Now imagine you ask someone a question, like, the respondent says, yes, I'm going to participate in the poll. First step. Second step, you ask them an easy question, like, what is the direction of the country? Or in this case, will you participate in the elections? And that's an easy question. There's nothing sensitive about that. If the government is wiretapping you, they don't know who in whose favor you will vote. So they will say yes. And that's the participation certainty index. 73.3% said they would participate in the elections. Then you ask them, who will you vote for? And then a lot more people get nervous and say, I don't know, or I refuse to respond. So the gap is the measure between the total amount of people who said they would participate and the total amount of people who are decided voters, who had an idea who they would vote for. So for this poll, that gap is only 5%. That means that very few shy voters, according to MPG. Meanwhile, when you look at IRI report and EVN report, these numbers are astronomical. You could drive a truck through it, which is why I think that this poll needs more attention than the others. And we will also, we will include this in the show notes. We will show it on the screen if you're watching it on video. But for every poll we'll talk about, I'm going to make it a point. I'm going to try hard to include this dashboard so you can see numerically how reliable this poll could be, or if there is a problem, you might have some answers. And I have a hypothesis why IRI and even report are showing such different results, and we can talk about that. What about you? I think you read the IRI poll more than I did, so tell me what
Yeah,
you
I
found.
went through it. Okay, so on to the much ballyhooed IRI poll. Let's talk a little bit about that. It was conducted right during the time when the EPC, the European Political Community Summit, was in Yerevan, as well as the EU Armenia Summit and the Yerevan Dialogue, orgasmic festival of love, which bathed the government and public airwaves with peace, 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 heart sign photo ops for Pashinyan and every EU leader. And of
As I
course, if you
say,
recall, yeah,
Eurovision. You know, it's
it
Euro, it was
was
Eurovision.
basically Eurovision.
But more importantly, do you remember the previous poll to IRI when it was conducted? It was right during Vance's visit,
That's
right?
absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
So,
That
like,
was
is someone coming up with these? I mean, if there's a momentary euphoria or state of euphoria or media attention, I mean, that obviously skews the results.
fool us once, you know. Guess what else was happening during the EPC? We had Macron, I think, jogging in the streets of Yerevan and just taking all these selfies and showing that Yerevan is just this beautiful European city. So it is not a surprise to see that respondents said that Armenia's most important political ally is France. It's not the United States. It's not the EU. It's not Russia. It's France who is the most important ally. Well, by the way, they're calling it the political ally. It's not an ally. And make what you want of that. But what I make of that is the fact that political ally removes the responsibility for doing anything. There's no security implications. There's no security guarantees. There's no defense aspect to the whole thing. It's just, they're going to release press releases when they kill Armenians or they take over some of your sovereign land or whatever. Anyway, enough of a rant for the moment. 75% of the poll respondents have said that they want EU accession. And the poll results read like how a Pashinyan election win would look like. And what do these 75% people want from EU accession? They want economic growth, they want visa liberalization, and peace. Let me ask again, how important is it for 3 million Armenians to have visa liberalization with the EU? What's in it, Hovik? I mean,
I mean, it's just
as a diasporan, I am not understanding how important this issue is, or is it just the PR that's going on in the country?
I think it's populist rhetoric, trying to give candy to the voters. And why not? Like, if you're a voter, you can go and visit Europe. I mean, it's another thing whether you could even afford to spend a day in Paris eating dinner. But most Armenians don't have enough salary to do that.
Yeah.
But it sounds nice, and we should remember, right? When there was a sale. I think one of the airlines was doing a sale where you could travel to um, Cyprus for $2 or something, one way or something. And Pashinyan said, you know, with the salary, with the pensions I raised, you can travel to Cyprus and come back 15 times or something like that, So it's the same in the same tone.
Yeah.
I think that
Well, Hovik, you're right. I mean, the whole thing just basically it could have been taken out of Pashinyan's campaign slogans. The poll results are just so perfectly matched to that. So let's take a quick look at voter trust here. Uh, at 29%, Pashinyan by far leads all politicians in trust. Samvel Garabedian is 8%, Arakaz Mirzoyan is 5%, Robert Kocharian is 4%, and Gagik Zarugyan is 3%. Now,
I hear the sound of a truck passing by. Sorry.
it's interesting to look at the support levels for each of the parties also. 32% support civil contract in Pashinyan, 6% support strong Armenia, 3% support Armenia alliance, and then, just as you were telling us, 23% are undecided still at
and
this
and
point in
another
time.
21%
That's right.
refused to answer.
Yeah, they didn't want to answer. I mean, one of the most interesting aspects of this whole thing, okay, so the 29% or the 32%, let's say that is kind of matching what MPG is seeing, about a third or a little bit less than third support in the population for civil contract. But they see the IRI sees a highly deflated number of support for each of the opposition candidates and their parties, I'm sorry, but 23% undecided and 21%. Now, this is going to be more than half of the population, the respondents who do not want to respond to the IRI. Why is that?
I mean, actually, so they respond to the poll, except they don't want to respond to that specific question. And that's, again, what I call the hidden vote. It could indicate fear about saying something on the phone that could be wiretapped. It could indicate some kind of hesitation. And I think the Occam's razor is the amount of fear in the environment currently right now in the whole electoral environment is so high when Pashinyan is actually threatening to kill opposition leaders. That why would be surprised? And I think the only difference then why is the MPG poll so different? So I think that voters have some kind of an understanding of who they're talking to. So
Now, there's
if
some kind of a bias
yeah,
going on.
right. If they're talking to a foreign organization, if the respondent, like EVN report, the two professors are from University of Las Vegas. I don't know how they identify themselves, but it could be like, hey, we're calling on behalf of this project that is sponsored by the University of Las Vegas. First, pro-opposition voters would probably be discouraged from that greeting and may not even continue, right?
Yeah.
But then, if they do continue, they have that knowledge that these pollsters are from the US government, which is currently pushing TRIPP and pro-Pashinyan. So they may have a hesitation in talking to the US government and or even a US organization and telling them their intentions, because everyone is being listened to in Armenia, wiretap.
But let me also mention that this number, this undecided and refused to respond categories, have actually gone up since the previous IRI poll. So there's a larger number of people who are not communicating their preferences, which is kind of interesting to see.
Asbed, since you talked about it, I also want to mention I actually plotted 6 polls. I plotted the hidden vote index, okay, which is that number. The higher that index, the stronger the support for Pashinyan. And the lower that index, the stronger support. I mean, it's linear. You can draw a trend line through it, which is another indicator that, hey, even if I take out the MPG polls from that graph, and I'll include the graph in the show notes, you still see a trend line from poll to poll. Doesn't matter the time. It will, if that poll is showing that the hidden vote index is high, then the opposition numbers are low, and vice versa.
So in conclusion, for this one segment, Hovik, we think that a lot of people who are not pro-Pashinyan types may not be fully disclosing their preferences to Western NGO polling.
Exactly.
I mean, and some of your numbers corroborate that.
I mean, that's one hypothesis. I want to actually test this out in the future, but we'll talk more about that. And I have some interesting ideas, maybe hopefully interesting, that maybe can involve crowdfunding our supporters, but we'll see.
Yeah. I want to very quickly mention, I can't go through a gazillion slides, obviously. So I just want to mention that the Armenian Church remains a very highly trusted institution in Armenia, despite all of Pashinyan's efforts and attacks on the Armenian Church, ad hominem attacks on the Catholicos Karagintu. The church remains in higher regard, actually, than Pashinyan's office, which is very interesting. And of course, as Pashinyan would like you to believe, the army and the police are seen as the highest trust institutions in Armenia, even though I would say that we haven't seen a single military drill or military exercise on the part of the army. I'm not sure what their state of readiness is, what their size is, exactly what's going to happen, but we'll take it for what they're saying. You mentioned the TRIPP. Can I talk a little bit about that for just a moment? Pashinyan's signature foreign policy accomplishment is the Trump route, the TRIPP. It does not enjoy universal support. Even in the IRI poll, 44% are for it and 42% are against it. 61% say Armenia is headed in the right direction. The funny thing is only 32% are naming civil contract and Pashinyan as their vote choice. Even among very likely voters, civil contract is at 38%. So this suggests that right direction is not necessarily highly associated with the government's support. Isn't that a little strange? I mean, what do they think the right direction is going to be under, let's say, strong Armenia or Armenia alliance? Do they think it's going to stay the same? It's going to be a pro-EU or um, I don't exactly know what they're thinking. I find it
Yeah.
strange that 61% think that we're headed in the right direction and only 32% are voting for the people who are maintaining that direction.
I forget who said it, but the only poll that matters is going to be the one on election day. I think that will be more difficult to change in such high numbers. I mean, the Pashinyan will do everything, and I'm not even excluding the fact that he will falsify a portion of the vote. But given that it involves physical ballot counting, it'll be more difficult, but maybe a few percentages here and there. But I think that the the actual vote on the day of the elections will have a better result.
You say free and fair elections, and in the IRI poll, 71% of the respondents expect free and fair elections, and 40% trust absolutely no politicians. Do they think elections run themselves? Okay.
Again, the contradictions are many in this
If
report.
there's nobody to trust, how are we going to have free and fair elections? Similarly, we have 62% who are satisfied with the prime minister's office, 40% trust no politicians. Sometimes these little incongruencies make you wonder where some of these responses are coming from. Or maybe there's a place that we can say they're thinking about civil contract and the policies that they're seeing and they're liking it, okay, but maybe Pashinyan has become a liability even to his own party.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment when we're done with these polls. So I guess I can conclude that the IRI poll is rather favorable to Pashinyan's government, but not in a very clean way. The government leads, the opposition is weak, and voters broadly expect, well, in the context, we should say they hope the elections are going to be free and fair, but trust in politicians is really poor. Undecided voters are high, and TRIPP remains deeply polarizing, even within the context of this Western poll. The
Yeah.
poll's biggest issue is that several top-line pro-government findings are accompanied with very weak political trust and large non-committed electorates.
Just to close this poll, or our discussion on this poll, the hidden vote index is 44%. That means when you asked who will you vote for, 44% refused to disclose. And when you measure the gap between those who said yes, they will participate, I call it the sensitivity gap. Yes, I will participate, but then they refuse to disclose who they will vote for. That gap is essentially 43%. In the IRI poll, nearly 99% of the respondents either knew that they were going to vote or knew that they were not going to vote. So 92% said they will vote for sure, and 7% said they won't vote, and then 1% is the remaining undecided. If you subtract 1 from 44, you get 43% of people essentially are nervous to disclose to the pollster their true voting intention. I have a little comparative analysis. I'm not going to go into too much, but I will include it in the show notes. I analyzed all the 6 polls that were released, public polls that were released since, let's say, March or February. Yeah, I guess March. Two from each pollster. Two from MPG, 2 from EVN report, and 2 from IRI. I calculated the hidden vote index. So just go to our show notes and you will see how stark the difference is. The MPG poll has a low or very low hidden vote index, meaning that voters aren't shy to disclose to the pollster their voting intention. And for MPG and IRI, that number is truckworthy. Let's see. Yeah, I'll include my trend line that shows the clear correlation among all these polls. And yes, correlation is not causation, but I'm going to repeat my hypothesis, and I would like to test this in the future, is that different polling organizations attract different groups of people. And, someone might think, I'll answer to a local Armenian poll, but someone else might answer only to international polls. The only thing that I will give credit to IRI is they publish their response rate, and it was 16% this time. Now, the last poll that they did was 22%. So that indicates even a drop in the response rate, which also needs to be taken in as a signal that people are more reluctant to respond to their polls. Now, we don't know if others are suffering from the same dynamics, but at least, I can give credit to IRI for publishing that.
So there's this poll from CAEAC, and boy, I hadn't noticed that it's very palindromic, CAEAC or CAEAC. Okay, anyway, let's stop being funny about it. It was conducted from May 4 to 11 by the Free Alliance of Euro-Asian Sociologists. They focus on countries of Eurasia, particularly Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Azerbaijan, with a focus on issues of politics, international relations, and security. And I just want to preface it again and again by saying that we don't know a whole lot about these people. We came across it in an Armenian newspaper. The link is going to be in the show notes. The results are very incompatible with just about every other poll. So take this with a very, very heavy grain of salt. They note that Samvel Garabedian's strong Armenia party is almost 3% ahead of the ruling Civil Contract Party. They have 20.6% versus 17.8. According to the results of the survey, the votes of approximately 60% of the voters who intend to go to the polls would be distributed among the main political forces as follows. United opposition would be Garabedian, Kocharian, and Zarugyan. They would have 46%, and Civil Contract, as an opposition party, would have 18%. Taking account of spoilers, the opposition would have captured more than half of the votes, while the pro-government camp would have approached 30% of the votes. So Samvel and Narek Garabedian and Robert Kocharian have positive ratings. This is what it said in the article, but I believe that they are talking about the trust and versus distrust levels. And Pashinyan is the most unpopular in the country, trusted by approximately 11% and distrusted by approximately 79% of the population. So the poll is out there, and for what it's worth, we just want you to be aware of it.
Well, I mean, we just see the publicly reported newspaper results, but I think it's important to state that unless we see the full report, maybe the report exists, I actually will try to find it, and especially find all those answers like the non-substantive responses, the error margin, and anything else like that. Unless we have that, saying these numbers is less meaningful. We already gave you a disclaimer, but saying these numbers is less meaningful than the MPG poll, the IRI poll, and the EVN report poll, for which we have the more data. Let's just put it that way. So let's look at this data, and maybe we can come back to it in the future. But
maybe somebody decided to have the anti-Kopalyan, anti-UNLV poll out there.
Well, all right. Should we go to elections?
Let's talk about elections, Hovik.
It continues to be a very, very tumultuous campaign, with Pashinyan threatening to either jail his opposition leaders, to make them kneel in front of him, or to even kill them. But one of the key topics of this campaign was the settlement of Azerbaijanis in Armenia. And the opposition is bringing this up, and I think justifiably, that if Pashinyan wins the elections, then there will be gradual settlement of Armenia by Azerbaijanis, and the basis for that is Aliyev's own agenda and Aliyev's own words. Aliyev, the government of Azerbaijan, funds an organization called the Western Return to Western Azerbaijan or Western Azerbaijan. They make statements about, yes, we will, we're going to be returning eventually. Aliyev has told Pashinyan in the past, yeah, you must negotiate with these people, and they claim to be descendants or either displaced Armenians. But here's a funny part. They say that they have a list of 300,000 Azerbaijanis who want to return to Armenia. Now, even in the late 1980s, I think the official numbers are there were 200,000 Azerbaijanis in Armenia. So when the government of Azerbaijan is making these statements, when they're regularly holding festivals, they're going to hold a festival in Nakhichevan soon, and all these events are very well organized. They invite Western experts, they invite EU experts to attend. What can the opposition conclude but that this is essentially being hidden from the public because it would not look good for Pashinyan to say, yes, we're going to bring in 100,000, let's say. Maybe it begins with like 10,000. Maybe it begins with one village on the TRIPP road, just right next to TRIPP. But it's beyond question that this is an agenda that Azerbaijan has, and given Azerbaijan's track record and Aliyev's track record, I think that Aliyev has very high chances with Pashinyan of implementing this. What's regrettable is that all of these Western-funded, foreign-funded fact checkers are essentially fact-checking this, right? They're saying this is false because the government of Armenia denies this, and the effect this has is reducing visibility for media that talk about this and reducing the voice of the opposition.
Yeah.
And I will just add that even Aliyev, in one of his recent public statements or interviews, said that, yes, this is on our agenda, but we decided to drive it in parallel with the peace talks. So they're not making it a precondition to the peace talks. And he explicitly mentioned, given the sensitivity of the nature, and given that Armenian people might find this a little unsettling, but he has said that we will return to Armenia. We will not go there in tanks. We will drive there in cars. And
well, Hovik, all I can say is it shows that Pashinyan is clearly lying about this issue. He says he's not discussing it. Well, maybe it's not on the agenda of negotiations, like they don't sit necessarily and talk about this, but this problem exists. And
do you remember when Pashinyan was denying that Armenia was negotiating in the OSCE, that Armenia had a proposal from the OSCE Minsk group in 2019?
Yeah.
Pashinyan kept saying that there's no such proposal. We're not discussing this. And we knew we finally figured out that there actually was a proposal that he ignored because he said it's not addressed to me.
Right. So let's move on. I don't even want to dignify this. If I were president and some politician came to Armenia and asked me to talk about this, I would say, the next time you raise this issue, I'm putting you in a taxi to the airport and you're not coming back to Armenia. And we're done.
And yes, we shouldn't dignify that rhetoric, but we should say that actually, if Pashinyan somehow holds on to power after the elections, there will be 300,000. Most likely, there will be 300,000.
The issue is going to ramp up.
Azerbaijanis in Armenia. That's more truthful than the opposite.
So I want to ask you to talk a little bit about this. We talked about Pashinyan threatening people and jailing people and what have you. There's Andranik Tevanyan's issue. You want to talk a little bit about this?
Okay, so the issue of Andranik Tevanyan, he is number 2 on the Prosperous Armenia list. He's from the actual Mother Armenia party, but they're partnering with Prosperous Armenia. And it was very weird, right? Pashinyan was actually in a previous podcast episode, I said it was during Parliament. Parliament is closed right now. Pashinyan is on vacation. So during one of his campaign rallies, he said, Andranik Tevanyan, you're a traitor. And tomorrow, the investigative committee will open a case. and they will arrest you.
Yeah.
What happens the next day?
Well, a whole bunch of NSS showed up, and they couldn't slap a 2-month pretrial detention on Tevanyan any faster.
Well, they did wait a little bit because during elections, the CEC actually has to temporarily annul the, they have some kind of an immunity during the elections. So they applied to the CEC, but the CEC, being run by Pashinyan's friend, Vahagan Novakimian, immediately rubber stamped the request. And there we go. Now we have another opposition member in jail. And the accusation was
Tevanyan actually has a popular media site, Yotor, what is it,
7 days.
7or.am, right? I couldn't access that website. And I think that they had confiscated all of their media equipment so that they could no longer broadcast. So
Yeah, I don't know
they've been
if
taken off the
they,
air, as far as I could tell. So what's the real claim? What do they want?
So the
Why is
claim
he a
is
traitor to the nation?
so the claim is that for 622,000, remember, these are all allegations by the government that is known to fabricate data. Please keep that in mind. The government alleges that Tevanyan received $622,000 in order to pass on to a foreign company, I think maybe Russian, I don't know, that's what they're insinuating, some details of a parliamentary meeting, a closed door session of the parliament. Now, Tevanyan was not a member of parliament at that time in 2024 when the alleged events happened. The meeting was not secret, it was closed doors, and the transcript or the summary of the meeting was published on the National Assembly website. So despite this, and that's according to Geran Manukyan from the ARF, from an interview he gave. Essentially, despite this, they say that Tevanyan, without having any co-conspirators, somehow found out what was being discussed in this closed-door session of the parliament and passed it on to a foreign agency, and that was material that amounted to treason. Again, according to Geran Manukyan, none of the material in that session, which he was present at, was secret. It was not classified as secret. So, and the parliament itself published that. So it's obvious. I mean, to me, this is obvious that this is another attempt to silence the opposition. But why wait 2 years, right? This happened in 2024. And right during elections, 2 weeks before the elections, you make this accusation and you arrest him. And you don't allow him to campaign. You don't allow his media to function. What is this other than pressure against the opposition?
Well, maybe Marco Rubio is visiting so that he can make sure that the opposition is safe and, out of jail and everything.
Yeah. Well, we can
Hovik,
joke about.
I was really. I'm sorry.
Let's bet that Marco Rubio will talk about that or not.
Yeah.
I'm giving you 10-1 odds. I mean, actually, one of the most.
Maybe we'll go on Polymarket and start something. Yeah, I was pretty affected by this week. I think that there was a fellow who was a mentally ill guy, Armen Hovhannisyan. He was arrested for destroying a Pashinyan campaign poster. I think the charge was obstructing or coercing participation in campaign activities. And normally something like this would carry an administrative fine as a maximum fine. But he got jailed. And then I guess in a few days they noticed that he was actually mentally ill and they transferred him to a mental institution. And within a day, the man committed suicide. And there are sometimes cases that really affect you. The guy scratches the poster, and as a consequence of a sequence of events, he loses his life. It was really
if campaign posters in Armenia are treated as so sacrosanct, then it's not apparent to me when concerns opposition campaign material. You know what they did? I think it was in Arctic, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
They tied a Strong Armenia campaign poster to the tail of a dead dog. I pray to God that they didn't actually kill the dog first, that he was somehow dead of natural causes or was a roadkill. And they tied a Strong Armenia poster to the tail of a dead dog and put the dog in front of a cross. So attacking the church at the same time. And guess what? Were there any arrests in Arctic because of this? I think you have the answer
Yeah,
to that
I think
already,
you have the
so we
answer.
don't need to.
But Hovik, speaking of that, we talked last week about Armenia Sohoyan, who demanded some answers from Pashinyan on his campaign trail. And then she was threatened by firing from her job. And it's starting to form some kind of a pattern here. You know, there have been a lot of people who've been taken out of their jobs. There was that fellow in Sunik who was in the armed services. I think he also got fired because he asked Pashinyan on a campaign trail to get paid more as a serviceman. And instead, he lost his job because. Well, this week it was Arthur Osipian. This man is a Yerevan-based activist and
He's
a
from Artsakh
defender
originally.
and a defender of the Artsakh Armenians, the rights of Artsaksis. He confronted Pashinyan at a campaign event, and Pashinyan went apeshit ballistic about this. He had his security detail drag Osipian away while he sought out a campaign megaphone and started pursuing him and screaming like a banshee. What are you doing here? You should have died while there was the Karabakh issue. Why are you people alive, you scumbag? It was kind of a shocking thing, and it went viral. And what was the outcome? The outcome is obviously clear. The opposition roundly criticized Pashinyan for his insane behavior. Osipian, of course, was arrested for hooliganism. And hooliganism has basically become a grab bag tool for the so-called hybrid war, meaning war on anyone who speaks out against Pashinyan. And he was jailed. Osipian was jailed, and he started I believe he
Hunger
started
strike.
a hunger strike, and he's still in a hunger strike. And this started about a week ago.
And all he's demanding is that Pashinyan apologize to
He
him.
was not
But
violent. He was not violent. He
it's
was
it's
having
all
an
on
argument
video.
about
It's
this.
it's all on
Yeah,
video, and knowing people who have risked their lives to go to fight, knowing people who have lost their children in Artsakh, um, to be called, like, I think he basically was effectively addressing the entire opposition and saying, "Why aren't you dead?" And he was addressing Artsaksis because he said, "You with the Artsakhi accents," and he said, "You with the pseudo elite of Artsakh." Now, I don't want to go into details about Arthur Osipian's background because I believe that at some point in time he was pro-Pashinyan. But that aside, Pashinyan essentially turned this into a hate fest against Artsaksis. Um, and I wanna ask you, Asbed, like, I mean, is that something that we are covering this as if it's a normal issue? Most media are treating this as a normal issue, but I think this transcends a little bit too far into the personal space, into your families. Why are you alive, Asbed? If you ask you, so tell me why you're alive. And if you're listening to us in the diaspora, are you alive? If you're alive, what are you doing about this?
I do not feel alive. I feel like all this, covering all this, and living with all this news every week is killing me inside. And I think that, this hate towards Artsaksis is hate towards Armenians, plain and simple. There's no ifs or buts about this. This is plain and simple hate for Armenians. I can't put it any other way. And all I can say is take your meds, Nikol. The last thing that the Armenians need is a fucking psycho to be elected as prime minister of Armenian nation. So
You
I
know,
don't know what else. I have
so
no idea what else I can say.
this is actually news, so it's relevant. The Alliance Party, unfortunately, the only party in Armenia that was campaigning on bringing back the death penalty for treason, has dropped out of the race. That's all I can say. And it is treason. It is worse than treason. It is treason to not only your country, it's treason to your nation, it's treason to for the descendants of the genocide survivors. Imagine a nation like ours, having like being clumped together in a small land, 1.5 million of us in Armenia, and of course a much larger diaspora who kept the flame going. And then you have another Armenian genocide happening in 2023, and you have a leader who carries an Armenian last name, whose actual background needs to be investigated, who says that, why are you alive? And what really irks me is not that he's saying that, is that he's being allowed to a certain extent to continue that rhetoric. And I think most of our listeners, based on our view count, based on vulgar polling, to use Edgar Elbakian's term, among my friends, no one cares. Everyone has tuned out. So actually, I want to ask the diaspora, are you alive still? And if you are alive, diaspora, then you need to do everything possible to ensure that if you know anyone who can vote in Armenia on June 7, 2026, tell them, convince them, beg them, plead with them to go and vote. It doesn't matter how they vote, but please convince them to go and vote.
Right. We are over our self-imposed time, but I think we have to cover one more thing.
Okay.
This stuff is nonstop. Pashinyan threatened to nationalize Gagik Zarugyan cement factory. Talk a little bit about that, like just a couple of minutes.
I mean, that's not new, but
well, it's happening over the last 2 weeks.
I was going to say that, well, that's to be expected of Pashinyan. I was going to say the way he did it was interesting, but also that's also always how he does it. On his campaign trail, he said that if you vote for me, we're going to strip all the property from Tsarukyan. They're all going to be bums. And specifically, he said, we're going to nationalize the cement factory, which belongs to Gagik Tsarukyan. It's a private property. And how, people ask, like how, and then the investigative committee, or I think it was a prosecutor's office, the following day, dutifully, I mean, he makes a campaign statement, right? It's not even a statement as an official prime minister. The following day, the prosecutor's office says, we have looked into the events of the 2002 privatization of the cement factory, and we have found violations, and we have referred the case to the Anti-Corruption Committee of Armenia. And that's how things are being done in Armenia. And that's the Armenia that Marco Rubio wants you to vote for. That's the Armenia that Macron wants you to vote for. And that's an Armenia that, if it continues, then I think Pashinyan's statement that whether we'll be living or dead will sooner or later come true.
Thanks, Hovik. I want to close with just 2 lines. Ruben Vartanian addressed the Armenian nation in Armenian, and I'm just going to translate that to English, and I'm just going to read that moment because it rings with me, and in the past I've actually said this, and I've said this multiple times. Look, the greatest danger is indifference. Indifference is more dangerous than any other vice. The opposite of love is not hatred, but indifference. The opposite of good is not evil, but indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, but indifference. The opposite of life is not death, but indifference. We cannot remain indifferent. We have a problem, and we need to face it head on, take it head on. We can't just sit home and decide that it's somebody else's problem. Somebody else will go to the streets. Somebody else will do something, whether you're in the diaspora and whether you're in the nation's capital of Armenia. You have to do something about this. You can't remain indifferent.
Well
Thank
said.
you. Today is, I guess, May 26th at this point. Hovik. I'm Asbed Bedrosian.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan, still wanting to be alive.
We'll talk to you next week.